The United States Army chose the Ozarks for a specific reason. In 1940, when the War Department was searching for land to build a massive new training installation ahead of anticipated American involvement in World War II, its first choice was a site somewhere else. That fell through. The Army needed flat land, open space, road access, and critically, a reliable source of clean groundwater to sustain tens of thousands of soldiers through training operations year-round. The War Department site selection team evaluated multiple locations across the mid-continent. The Ozarks made the short list specifically because the groundwater was exceptional. The Ozark Aquifer system beneath Pulaski County in the Missouri Ozarks was clean, abundant, and accessible in a way that few locations in the region could match. The Army liked what it found. In December 1940, construction crews broke ground. They built nearly 1,600 buildings and over 5 million square feet of training space in 6 months. It was one of the most rapid military construction projects in American history. The community of Bloodland, a small Ozarks settlement in Pulaski County, was cleared to make room. Families were given notice to leave. The homes, the church, the community structures were demolished or absorbed. The one thing removed and preserved was the church bell. It was relocated to the nearby town of Waynesville, where it still stands as the only physical remnant of a community the Army erased. Fort Leonard Wood was built on top of what Bloodland had been, and the United States Army became the dominant institution in the Missouri Ozarks in terms of land, employment, economic power, and what happens to the groundwater beneath 61,000 acres of military installations sitting in the middle of the Ozarks Plateau. What is happening to that groundwater right now is the story the Army has not been telling the surrounding communities. Subscribe right now, hit the button and the bell. Fort Leonard Wood, today, trains more than 80,000 military and civilian personnel every year. It is home to the Military Police School, the Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear School, and the Army Engineer School. It is the 5th largest employer in Missouri, generating over $2 billion in economic activity for the state annually. The 4 counties surrounding it, Pulaski, Laclede, Texas, and Phelps, are so economically dependent on the installation that a regional organization called the Sustainable Ozarks Partnership was created specifically to promote the community's alignment with the base's continued mission and growth. When the Army makes decisions about its footprint, the surrounding communities follow along because they have very little choice. The economic dependency is total in a way that is unusual even by the standards of military-adjacent communities. That economic dependency is one of the reasons what is happening beneath Fort Leonard Wood has received so little sustained public attention. When your county's economic survival runs on a single institution, investigating what that institution may be doing to your water supply requires a kind of political courage that most local governments do not have, and most local media organizations cannot sustain against the relationships and advertising dependencies that shape coverage in small markets. What Missouri's Department of Natural Resources has documented, in official regulatory language, in reports available on the department's own website, is this. Fort Leonard Wood has a variety of legacy environmental releases resulting from decades of training and housing military personnel. Those releases include chlorinated solvents from past dry cleaning operations that have contaminated the groundwater below the cantonment area and are being actively monitored. They include pesticides from historical use on the installation, petroleum products, polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, metals, volatile organic compounds, military munitions, and munitions constituents from training ranges and closed facilities scattered across the 61,000 acres. And, documented separately, because of its particular severity, per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, known as PFAS. PFAS are what scientists call forever chemicals. The name is technically accurate. PFAS molecules are built on carbon-fluorine bonds, among the strongest bonds in organic chemistry, which is why they were useful in industrial and military applications for decades, and why they are now one of the most significant environmental contamination problems in American history. They do not break down in the environment. They do not break down in the human body. They accumulate. Scientific studies have linked PFAS exposure to kidney cancer, testicular cancer, liver cancer, pancreatic cancer, immune system disruption, hormonal disruption in adults, and developmental problems in children exposed during critical growth periods. The primary source of PFAS contamination at military installations is aqueous film forming foam, AFFF, a firefighting agent required by the military in fire training, equipment testing, and emergency response beginning in 1969. It was effective. It was widely used. It was used on training grounds at Fort Leonard Wood for decades. Nobody told the families living in the communities surrounding the installation that the foam being used in those training exercises was driving a class of persistent chemicals into the groundwater beneath the Ozarks Plateau. The same groundwater the Army had specifically selected the Ozarks for in 1940 because of its quality and reliability. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this story matters. Missouri's Department of Natural Resources confirmed in 2023 that PFAS had been detected at Fort Leonard Wood, among a number of state brownfields and defense restoration sites. The Army's own Environmental Command has an active PFAS response page for Fort Leonard Wood. The Missouri Coalition for the Environment has identified it as a documented site of concern. The Army states it is working to address these environmental releases through a number of cleanup programs. That is the official language. But the department's own documentation states clearly that a number of sites at Fort Leonard Wood still require investigations or cleanup investigations. The distinction between requiring investigation and completing cleanup is not administrative. It is the difference between knowing a problem exists and having solved it. Many of the sites at Fort Leonard Wood that require cleanup have not been cleaned up. Some have not yet been fully investigated. The contamination that is actively documented includes the chlorinated solvents in the groundwater below the cantonment area and the PFAS from decades of firefighting foam use. That contamination is being monitored. Monitored is not the same as remediated. Monitoring means the Army knows where the contamination is and is watching it. It does not mean the contamination is being removed or that it has stopped spreading. The groundwater beneath Fort Leonard Wood flows. That is why the Army chose this location in 1940. The Ozark Aquifer system beneath Pulaski County was exactly the kind of reliable, abundant, clean groundwater that a massive military installation needs to function. Those groundwater flow properties also mean that contamination introduced into the aquifer system at Fort Leonard Wood does not stay at Fort Leonard Wood. PFAS chemicals released at military installations move with groundwater along established flow paths. The Army's environmental documentation acknowledges that groundwater monitoring is ongoing because the contamination has migrated from its original release points. Where it is migrated to, and what wells, what springs, what drinking water sources sit downstream, is information that the surrounding communities have not been given in any comprehensive public forum. The 4 counties surrounding Fort Leonard Wood, Pulaski, Laclede, Texas, and Phelps draw their water from the same Ozark aquifer system that sits beneath the installation. Most communities in this region rely entirely on groundwater. There are no major surface water alternatives. The water comes from wells that tap the same aquifer that the Army has been contaminating for 80 years, with chemicals that the Army's own Environmental Command is still investigating and has not fully cleaned up. The Army is also the largest single landowner in the Missouri Ozarks. 61,000 acres in Pulaski County alone, locked behind military fencing, are controlled by federal authority that supersedes county zoning, state environmental oversight, and community input. No Pulaski County resident voted on what happens to those 61,000 acres. No county commission approved the environmental practices that have contaminated the groundwater beneath them. The installation operates under federal jurisdiction that the surrounding communities cannot challenge in any meaningful sense. State environmental regulators have oversight roles, but limited enforcement authority against a federal installation. This is not an argument against Fort Leonard Wood's existence or mission. The installation brings $2 billion a year to Missouri. It trains the people who defend the country. The communities around it have built their economies around its presence because the employment is real, and the economic activity is real, and the economic dependency is real enough that a regional organization was specifically created to ensure the community's alignment with the base's continued operation. But the groundwater is also real. The PFAS is also real. The chlorinated solvents migrating through the aquifer beneath the cantonment area are also real. The sites that still require investigation are also real. And the economic dependency that makes it politically difficult for Waynesville and Pulaski County and the surrounding communities to ask hard public questions about what their largest employer is doing to their water is also real. Perhaps the realest factor of all, because it explains why this story has not appeared on a front page in Missouri in any significant form, despite being documented in publicly available government records. The Army chose the Ozarks for its groundwater. The Army has spent 80 years contaminating that same groundwater with chemicals it deployed during training operations, without disclosing to the surrounding communities what those chemicals would do to the water beneath their homes. The cleanup programs that currently exist are real, and some progress has been made. But the sites that still require investigation outnumber the sites that have been remediated. The contamination that has been confirmed in the groundwater cannot be fully removed. Language from the Missouri DNR about heavy metals in groundwater aquifers elsewhere in Missouri says it is technologically impracticable to clean up. Forever chemicals earned their name. The Bloodland church bell stands in Waynesville as a memorial to the community the Army removed to build its installation. The families displaced from Bloodland were told the sacrifice was necessary. They accepted it. The communities that surround Fort Leonard Wood today have accepted a different kind of sacrifice: the economic dependency that makes criticism politically difficult, the contamination that the Army's documents acknowledge and the Army's cleanup programs have not resolved, and the groundwater the Army chose the Ozarks for in 1940, which the Army has been degrading ever since. That story is in public documents. It is not on any front page. It is happening right now. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. Drop a comment. Did you know about the PFAS contamination at Fort Leonard Wood? The Army's documents are publicly available. The question is whether anyone is reading them. Thank you for watching. The truth doesn't shout. It waits for you to look closer.